The title of The Day the Earth Stood Still is a really good illustration of how he was able to use and fuse these very different instruments into a tremendously effective sequence. There you hear these sort of crystalline, moving harp, they would call them arpeggios, and percussion instruments moving around, giving it a bed of sound, and then you will have the theremins soaring over it, almost flying with the main theme. And then the brass, the muted brass that he used in this large brass section, plays three notes that we've come to associate almost with another science fiction film, 2001, which of course came many years later. It would be an interval called perfect fifths, where the music goes ba 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 ba. And I don't know if that was just a musical effect that Herman chose, or if he is nodding back to Richard Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra, from which that originally came. That's a concert piece later heard in 2001, but it's a wonderful color, and he is able to combine all of these orchestral instrumental colors in this kind of churning, turbulent overture that gives a tremendous sense of movement that both sets the tone of the film, the agitation, the sense of flying through space. It's a great example of how he could be both intuitive in his music and have things just seem to be instinctually right, and then have an almost intellectual idea if you analyze what these things represent. For the title sequence, in which time is actually stopped, he recorded a very dissonant cue involving vibraphone and brass, and then augmented it with a number of tracks played backwards in a move that sort of anticipates what the Beatles would be doing 15 or so years later. So Herman was just really, I think, a tremendous pioneer in creating sounds and certainly understanding what a film needed. There is a bit of more conventional scoring in the film, not very much, but it's interesting that Herman uses a very salutary anthem-like brass passage when Michael Rennie is seeing the Lincoln Monument, and he uses the trumpets as a sort of emotional linking of the spirit of people who are seeking peace. And it's a wonderful cue, I think, and again, very simple and yet profoundly moving. Darryl Zanuck was someone who was very appreciative of Herman. I found a number of notes from Zanuck letting Newman or Herman know that he thought that the music had greatly assisted a project that needed it, and called some of Herman's work the finest ever done for the Fox studio.
He was one of the big contributors to this movie, because if you see the picture without sound, I mean without music, you see it with just dialogue or without music and sound effects, actually the music track provided a great many of what might be called sound effects. So there was a combination there. And when the robot's visor would go up, the audience knew that there was trouble ahead, and Herman accompanied that with that weird sound. And you knew that the beam, the electronic beam, the ray, was going to come out of that robot and do something destructive. And all the way through the early part of the picture, when he destroys the guns, the artillery and the rifles, you knew that this creature had a lot of power. So, but Herman's music over those effects major contributed to the eerie feeling you got in the audience. There's no way of calculating what he contributed.
It's interesting to me that when Herman later recorded another science fiction or fantasy score of his for Fahrenheit 451, a film he did with Francois Truffaut in the 60s, Herman notes rather proudly that it does not employ any of the electronic cliches that are so much in vogue at present, I believe was his quote. And it's true, after The Day the Earth Stood Still, many people latched on to the sounds that he had employed and turned a very ingenious and innovative score into, in its later derivation, something of a cliche, but I don't think that should reduce the tremendous effectiveness of what he accomplished in this film. I think it's really a milestone in film music.
This is Elmer Davis again. We still don't know what it is or where it comes from, but there's something there. It's been tracked around the Earth by radar, traveling at a rate of 4,000 miles an hour. This is not another flying saucer scare. Scientists and military men are already agreed on that. Whatever it is, it's something real.
We interrupt this program to give you a bulletin just received from one of our naval units at sea. A large object traveling at supersonic speed is headed over the North Atlantic toward the east coast of the United States.
I like very much in all of my films to open with something that will catch an audience up, that's interesting, unusual, fascinating. I like to grab an audience right at the very beginning, right at the opening of a film, grab them if I can and never let them go all the way through. Keep their interest up. And that's through pacing and timing. Now I want to point out one thing, that the pace does not mean necessarily just speed. Pace is interest. You could have something that's slow, but what your content up there is interesting to the audience, it'll just go move along fast as it can be. So we mustn't misinterpret pace as something that just is absolute tempo and this has to be fast in movement. Pace is interest. And so I want to get open in my films as often as I can, try every time to, with a sequence that will just catch the audience up, get them involved right off the bat, stir them up, get them into my film right away. And then hopefully, never let them go. Keep it all moving and going, holding their interest. A case in point is The Day the Earth Stood Still, which opened with these various stations around the world with some unknown object out there going at unheard of speeds for those days, and where is it going to go, and getting the whole world kind of upset and concerned about what in the world is happening, what's coming toward our planet, what's going to do to us, raises all these questions in your minds, and we finally end up showing it coming in over the ellipse in Washington, settling down. And but that got us, it seems to me, off to a very good start in terms of interest, as I say, and involvement by the audience in what in the world. The audience was going right along with all the radio announcers around different places in the world. What is this? What could this be? Our audience is saying that. What in the world is coming here? What is it? Right away, you got them hooked. You see, I think it's marvelous.
You often have trouble with titles. Titles are either you got them from the word go, or you sweat and sweat and sweat, and sometimes come up with the right one, and very often come up with terrible titles that you have to decide on when the picture's about to be released. And this one was, we were down to the wire. We were holding up all kinds of whatever little publicity the marketing people, they weren't called marketing then, but they were the marketing people were planning, but we held it up because we didn't have a title that we liked. And one day, the vice president in charge of sales and advertising was out here in California. He was at lunch in Zanuck's dining room. He said, "What the hell are we going to call your goddamn movie?" And I said, "We're searching." And he said, "You know, I got an idea. Everything stops at noon that day. The guy stops everything in the world. How about the day the world stopped?" I said, "You know what, it sounds good." And around the table, there were about 8 guys around the table. They all said, "Sounds pretty good." A couple of them, of course, were waiting for Zanuck to say, "Sounds pretty good," and then they said it sounded pretty good, but he liked it. And it came to me later. Not really, I would like to state, my memory is that it came to me later. I think it was I who then came up with Earth sounding better than world, and stood still, scanned better than stopped. I think it was my adaptation of that man's idea of the day the world stopped, etc. So The Day the Earth Stood Still became the title.
We always have the practice of taking our films once we have them pretty well set and all, but before we finally button them up, to take them out for sneak previews, to try them out on audiences to see how they play. Well, Zanuck saw the film when we got it all done and polished up and everything, and he said, "That's fine." He said, "Just don't bother the preview, just ship it, get it on the way." And we were very upset about that, because there's certain things in the film we wanted to be sure that the audience went along with, that they didn't laugh at some of it, not something that got a little off. So it just so happened right after that, Zanuck went to Europe, went out of town for some time, and Blaustein was put in charge of this unit that was making this film. And he said one of the first things he was going to do as that executive was have the sneak preview on Day the Earth Stood Still.
Well, we took the picture out to preview, and in the opening, when the alarm comes, you know, that there's a spaceship and it's landing, and we cut to Fort Myers, Virginia, and the tanks are coming out of the fort, and they take a turn and skid, and we put a screeching sound on it, and all of the military is mobilized, not all, but that area. The audience started to laugh. I died. My wife was with me, and she was black and blue because I was grabbing her arm without knowing it and squeezing, and I can recall sinking down in my seat so that my eyes were just about level with the back of the seats in front of me. I said, what is going to happen in about a minute and a half when that robot comes out of the spaceship? The audience will scream. And then we're cooked. If you laugh at the robot, you got no movie. I wanted to leave the theater. I didn't want to look. But inevitably, and the worst part of it was, the door of the spaceship opened, and the robot came out, which was after Klaatu was shot. There wasn't a sound in the theater except my exhaling. I can remember being so relieved. I was sure we had big trouble. Well, we went back to the studio afterwards, you know, to meet with Zanuck, which was the custom. And the publicity department brought the preview cards, which were heavily complimentary. And I said, I can't understand, Darryl, you know, the audience laughing. He said, it's obvious. He said, they're delighted that authority, particularly military authority, is being so silly and foolish that they think they could be effective against it. That's what they're laughing at. They're laughing in anticipation. He was so right. I took the picture out 2 more times without a change. And the same thing happened in the same place. And then I was satisfied that we were okay. But it was a very scary moment. Because, as I said, you don't take the robot seriously, goodbye movie.
You never know what you have in a film until you take it out for a sneak preview with a real audience. You can run it for your friends and your executives around the studio and other people in the business, professionals, but you never really know until you get it out with that preview audience, because they will tell you whether it's working or not. They will tell you whether the sequence is suspenseful or not. They will tell you whether it's funny or not. They'll tell you whether it's slow or fast. Well, they tell you, and you learn so much from those previews. It's just vital to have them.
When I think of Day the Earth Stood Still, I don't really actually think of it as part of the general run of classic and not so classic 50s science fiction movies. To me, it's really more of a holdover from the quality Fox pictures of the late 40s. There are very few science fiction pictures, certainly of the period, that are as literate and as intelligent and as carefully made. Whereas a lot of the other pictures were made by people who had to work very quickly, this was a real quality, grade A studio picture, and science fiction really didn't get that kind of attention from the studios, and I think this was largely because it was very early, and it was on the heels of the flying saucer scare and all that, you know, atomic fear stuff that was just starting, but none of that stuff had a foothold yet, and so this picture, I think, has managed to be unique because it's not like the other movies at all. The characterizations are much deeper. The story is more intelligent and better developed.